into a whole lot of negatives in this session. It does say council, in making its decision, may not consider. What we're talking about here are some of the parameters and limitations within which you have to make your decision. So there are some things which are outside the scope of your decision making, and in very broad terms they're listed there. Personal interests, and again that's something that you have to consider every time that you make decisions, so there shouldn't be anything unusual there. Trade competition is also an issue which can't be taken into account. That's something that's in the RMA. Trade competition is not a matter that you can consider in making decisions. The panel's process, the recommendations come to you and you have to make a decision on the face of those documents. You can't look at what the panel may or may not have done in its 2-year-long hearing process. That's outside the scope of your decision making. The next point is about the panel's identification of recommendations being in or out of scope. Again, that's not something that council can challenge. It's the independent hearings panel's role to make a decision as to what is in and out of scope. Just before I answer that question, Councillor Casey, any information that the panel has not received prior to making its recommendations to council. So that's a very important one to consider. The matters that you can take into account in making your decision are those that were before the hearings panel. So new information is outside the scope of your decision-making process.
Okay, should we take questions on that? This is a really, really important slide and probably gets to the heart of how we can, or why we can't take new information, i.e. new submissions or feedback. Councillor Coote.
Madam Chair, so just to clarify what that means, so that means if somebody around this table says, oh, but they didn't know that this was happening, so now we should make the decision because of this, we cannot do that, is that right? Yeah, so for example, so, yeah, so we can't bring anything new and we can't base that on the alerting.
Okay, people are clear about this, Councillor Casey.
Well, I don't understand why the process is, we're not allowed to look at the process, because obviously if we want to reject something, we'll have to tell them why we think they're wrong, as well as possibly putting up an alternative. But we disagree. But they're wrong because they've looked at X, Y, and Z. So you have to look at, you have to discuss what they've looked at and point out any omissions that they might have had.
I think you've answered your own question there, really. It's not the process that you're concerned about, it's the substance. And you can focus on the substance, but not how they got to their decisions.
So we can see you missed this entirely, but how do you then present new information if you've just said it's got to have been before it? What if we say, well, actually, you missed this?
So should we talk about that? Because in the next slide we talk about the rejection of a recommendation.
Perhaps I can just, at a high level, answer that. It's still got to be information that was before the panel, because you're dealing here not with just the panel's recommendations. Behind that were a whole lot of public submissions, evidence, all sorts of things which might support a different outcome in your consideration of the issue. So what I'm saying is it's not just a completely new idea that's popped up in the course of your debate. It's something that, on a principle basis, looking at the substance of what was before the panel, you consider should have been taken into account, or should have informed the decision, and that's what you want to put forward.
Madam Chair, just to, so this is quite early stage, but I think there might be, this could be a significant part of the discussions going forward, and certainly our hearings, where people might want to raise a different position. And I think it might be helpful, Penny and team, to give you as much context as possible as to why you would do that and what alternative you'd be putting up. I think it's probably quite critical.
CSA sitting there.
Well, I think as we talked about before the meeting started, in these committee meetings up until July, this is very much about an information about what was the position in the notified version, what were the general submissions on that particular topic, what was the council's case that you directed staff to take into the hearing, and it's not a conversation about the rights and wrongs or any of those aspects, that's just a factual information back to you about the background. When we come to looking at those key topics as part of the recommendations, we will, as officers, need to bring to you information about why we believe you should either reject or accept the recommendation of the panel on those key topics that you've asked us to look at. And in part of that, we will need to be able to give you the reasons why you should or shouldn't, based on our knowledge of the information that has been placed before them in the hearings panel. Where we are recommending rejection, we will need to be very clear why we believe there is a different position that could be taken to the one that the panel put forward, and that will have to be based on either we're rejecting it because we believe the council's case was the correct case in terms of those aspects that were on the previous slide to do with the council's functions, provisions of Part 2, those matters. If we believe we should reject it based on other evidence that was put in front of the hearings, we will have to explain that to you as elected representatives as well. So you're very clear on why we're recommending a rejection or not. And that's why, as we talked about before the committee started, where you as elected representative have read something in the recommendations that you think we should be rejecting, we are suggesting you take advantage of those drop-in sessions to meet with legal and planning staff so we can help you populate that template, which will get your thinking around why are the reasons you are recommending rejecting, what might be the alternative provisions, etc. And that means that when we come to those committee meetings in August, it's not a scattergun, approach where we're trying to, on the run, think of reasons for rejecting something. There's been a bit of thought done with you as elected representative and legal about that.
And that feeds into the next slide.
Okay, I've just got a couple of speakers just before we go to the next one. Councillor Cooper?
No, I didn't.
You're good? Councillor Penrose?
Yeah, just quickly, Madam Chair, I think all the will in the world, you're not going to get that message to everybody, and I think we've had this discussion around this table for 5 years, and we've tried every avenue possible. It's like having a sick horse and taking it to the trough for a drink. Unless you poke its head under there, it's not going to drink. And the messages from the staff has been clear right the way through this whole process. Through the UP process, and it's going to be a mission for us to try and get that message across. And I wouldn't want to be fixated on that.
Yeah, that's why I think even today we're picking up some of the gaps that we need to fill with a bit of time and a bit of discussion, just to take people right back to some of the basics. Councillor Webster.
Well, probably along the lines of Councillor Penrose, I mean, we've got to be totally upfront. There will be things in here that we don't individually like, but this is a plan for Auckland going forward, and it's no different from the LTP, where we vote, some of us, vote for it even knowing there are things in there that we actually don't particularly like, but it's a plan for Auckland, and this is no different. We can't let individual sort of, because we don't like something, if I don't like the rub or I don't like the ONL or whatever, that we have to revisit the whole process because of that. It's got to be what it is.
And I guess we then build up a picture about what is terminal and what we can live with. And that's part of the discussion. Councillor Walker?
It's for the next slide.
Okay. Right, so rejecting recommendation. James?
Oh, for some reason, it's not moving forward.
Oh, okay. Can we get on the next
Pick it in
one?
the guts.
It's been rejected.
That's all right.
We want to get on.
They didn't like that slide.
So,
Good. We're there.
okay, so going back to what Penny Pirrett was saying, if we reject a recommendation, by statute, there are things that we need to do to justify that rejection. So some of this will require quite a bit of work. So we need to provide reasons for rejecting the recommendation. And this is an and. We need to do 3 of these things, and provide an alternative solution that's within the scope of the submissions on the PORP, and undertake a Section 32 analysis.
What is that?
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with that, a Section 32 analysis is the underlying consideration of the benefits and disbenefits of whatever it is you're providing, you're considering as putting up as a provision in the plan. It also involves an economic analysis as well. So it's going to require quite a bit of work from staff to come up with a Section 32. That's
Benefits is not a word.
okay. Sorry, the mayor's just pulling me up on my language here.
It's an ugly word.
Excuse me, can we just have less crosstalk from the cheap seats, please? You're not cheering now, Dr. Walcutter.
He didn't like the word disbenefit, so it's,
I don't like that word either.
Section 32 analysis is a short term for the justification for whatever it is that we're coming up with, which takes into account the pluses and minuses for what it is that we're proposing.
Okay. Councillor Casey.
The question asked before about a halfway house, simply reject or accept, surely we can amend.
I think the amend part of what you're asking is contained in the rejection. So by amending something, you are in effect rejecting it. But
Well, no, we can accept it with some conditions.
You can't.
I think, and it's good to flesh this out early. It is a little bit like Yoda. I think there's only do or not do. There's no try. And I think that, without making light of it, it is kind of the legal advice. If we don't accept the recommendation, we reject it.
Okay.
yep, that's right. We're in a binary situation here. It's accept or reject.
Well, you're assuming that every word in the new plan is going to be God's word and it's correct. And I would imagine there's going to be some errors in there that need amending.
There's provision to make errors, corrections to errors if they're minor.
So what if they make a bad decision? You could correct it as well.
No,
There's no such thing as a bad decision.
Really
So I
quite
think-
innovative thinking.
So I think, councillor, and this, every councillor will be sitting there with exactly that same thought. This is the hard one, is we don't know yet what the bundle of recommendations is going to look like or how detailed they are. And this is going to be our debate and our discussion, is when is something tipping over the edge to rejection, because we're going to have a pretty damn good reason to reject, or when is close enough, good enough, and can be dealt with via plan changes or whatever. Can't answer all that now, but yeah, I guess the takeout from this is it is accept or reject of those recommendations. Yep, another question, Councillor
Yeah,
Casey.
you mentioned an economic analysis. Is it also a social analysis and a cultural analysis? Who's determining what has to go into it? This Section 32 analysis?
we would say that a cost-benefit analysis has to cover both economic, social, environmental, cultural analysis as well. A true, well-done cost-benefit analysis would look at those 4 aspects.
Yeah.
How long would it take you to do a Section 32 analysis? I know we're getting a template and that will speed things
So
up, but
it depends on what is the alternative provision being provided. So as I said earlier, if the council looks at the recommendations and says, we're going to reject this because we actually believe the case that the council took into the hearing was the correct case, then we will have done a lot of the Section 32 analysis for our case before the hearings panel, and we might not need to do a lot more work to make it robust enough to go along with our rejection. If we intend rejecting an aspect more because there's another submitter has raised a valid approach that, on balance, you as a council think is a better way forward, then, and that submitter didn't necessarily provide a Section 32 analysis in their hearings evidence, then we would have to start from scratch, and it will depend on the complexity of the issue at hand. I can't give you a whatever, but what we will need to do is make sure that the people within the council who do these cost-benefit analysis for us are ready and available to do that work, which is why I'm suggesting that if councillors have an inclination that there are areas that they want to convince the rest of the council to reject, then we unearth those at those drop-in sessions and through the template, so we can get staff looking at those issues sooner rather than leaving it right to the 3 days of that council meeting.